plumbers and electricians. Then they were never Ivy League educated, rich people. And then, a lot of things happened, including like the movie All the President's Men, and it became like a sexy profession for upper class people to go into. But by the time I went into journalism, it was all people like me. It was upper class kids who had gone to good schools and whose attraction to the job was being close.
Is history. I became as big of a Star Wars fan as almost anyone. The most shocking part though, my love for Star Wars began with a Star Wars prequel movie, Revenge of the Sith. And yes, to this day, I love that film. But now, here we are, more than 4 years after the release of Disney's first Star Wars film, Star Wars The Force Awakens. And the end result of this new Star Wars trilogy could not have been any more disappointing. I'm Andrew Kent, aka Sven Soli.
Galaxy. These Jedi strictly follow and adhere to the light side of the Force and the light side of the Force only. Something that ultimately led to the Jedi's downfall during the Clone Wars conflict. But the philosophy of the ancient Jedi Order was far different than this. The ancient Jedi spoke of balance, a harmony.
Blame me. They basically own or license everything I love and everything I hate. And that's not to mention the new season of The Mandalorian, because they own Star Wars. Also X-Men. That's right, they own the X-People. And just take a gander at the top grossing films last year and you'll be greeted by one name and one name only. See, from Endgame to Aladdin, from Frozen 2 to Toy Story 4, Disney made 7 of the top 10 highest grossing films of 2019. And while this feat is impressive, even for the big mouse, it's not exactly something new. In fact, many of the top 50 highest grossing films of all time were either made by or later bought by Disney. Now, maybe for some of you, this doesn't matter as long as you get that Marvel cinematic goodness injected into your eyeballs a few times a year. And I totally get it. But what if I told you that Disney's ever-broadening artistic reach is actually bad for culture? And not just because they made the worst Star Wars. How? Back to the show. In the past few decades, Disney has gone from an industry giant to an absolute behemoth, acquiring everything from the Muppets to Pixar to Marvel to Star Wars to most recently 21st Century Fox. Of course, Disney's game of hungry hippos, but for intellectual property, goes way back to the beginning. According to the company's own telling, founder Walt Disney moved to Los Angeles almost 100 years ago with, and I quote, "a lot of hopes but little else." How wholesome. 4 years later, Disney got his first taste of success with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The only catch, when Disney tried to make another round of these cartoons, he found out that his distributor had gone behind his back and poached all of his animators. Worse, upon reading the fine print of his contract, Disney realized he didn't even own the rights to Oswald. His distributor did. And thus, like a supervillain's origin story, our intrepid young Walt vows to never get screwed again. Or as Disney.com puts it, he saw to it that he owned everything that he made. Character. From then on, Disney became a veritable creative and financial powerhouse. By 1937, it would break all box office records with the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Early on, though, the success was predicated on a simple formula. Find an existing story, make it as cute and wholesome as possible to maximize your potential audience, and then dive into your Scrooge McDuck-sized money pool. Of course, you might think this is fine. After all, pop culture is, by definition, entertainment aimed at the largest possible audience. And Disney definitely had one thing: an aesthetic. You know, round faces, saucer eyes, big goofy grins, and if the kids love it, how could it be bad? Walt was basically ruthless in his quest to make all things adorable. And in the process, Disney has spent the last 100 years acquiring stories, adapting them, and ultimately twisting their original artistic intentions beyond recognition. All of which is to say, is all this cuteness actually super uncute? But to see the Disney method in action, let's dissect an early example: Pinocchio. For the uninitiated, the story revolves around the titular puppet who just wants to be a real boy. As the magical blue fairy tells him, his wish will be granted if he proves to be brave, truthful, and unselfish.
And someday you will be a real boy.
A real
Bleak morality tale. The simple moral? Be good or suffer. Throughout the story, we see a mean-spirited and rude Pinocchio, a stand-in for all misbehaving children. Robbed, starved, stabbed. And also, his legs get sawed off, but we're not supposed to feel especially sorry for him. His actions cause all of his suffering. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, Collodi also heaped on the psychological abuse, making Pinocchio at one point think he had killed Geppetto and the Blue Fairy, which I didn't even know was possible. And while you and I, growing up in a media diet full of high-saturated Disney cuteness, might find this story repulsive, it's pretty run-of-the-mill if you're familiar with old German folklore.